Patrick Mork, the brand father. Thanks for joining me here today. Where are you joining us from today?
I am live from Miami.
Man, where do we start? I got a head full of questions I want to nerd out. You're a Silicon Valley guy. There's been upheaval in Silicon Valley for the last week. Do I start with the OpenAI stuff with Patrick? Do I start with his journey and some of the personal decisions that he made? Do I start with, because I'm a nerd, with my phone? Do I start with him being the brand father for Google Play? What the hell? Where do I start, Patrick? You start. Where are we starting today?
We can start in so many different places. I think there's a lot of people geeking out about the OpenAI stuff this week, so we can talk a little bit about that.
Let's start there. So for those that are tuning in, what's happening in Silicon Valley?
Well, a lot of the news this week was around Sam Altman, who's obviously the CEO and the founder of OpenAI, being pushed out of his own company, right? Partially by his co-founders, and there was a mutiny on the board. And then all of a sudden, 24, 48 hours later, being reinstated as CEO, which is that is not something that we see every day. And that's kind of stuff is fresh in my mind not because of the brouhaha of the Netflix kind of fiasco of the guy being pushed out of his own company and reinstated. I looked at it more from, what does it tell us a little bit about OpenAI as a company from the perspective of how that company is led and what kind of culture that company has, right? So for folks who are not maybe into tech as much, or maybe have been busy this week, OpenAI obviously has created ChatGPT, which now has 100 million users. Sam is one of the founders of the company. I think it's the fastest growing company in the history of that kind of consumer-facing technology in terms of adoption rates, right? They've been remarkable. And obviously, ChatGPT is a large language model tool that allows anybody to ask any question and get answers. Now, whether the validity of the answers is always correct is a different question. But anyway, massively successful company, very high profile founder, very high profile product. And the guy was pushed out of his company ostensibly, based on what we know, because he was not being candid with the board, and the board felt that he wasn't telling them all the things that he was doing, and that he was making decisions that were maybe not aligned with where they wanted to take the board, where they wanted to take the company, right? That was the reason that we got, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you push out a founder like that, my time in Silicon Valley, pushing out founders for venture capitalists, for investors, or boards is always difficult. It's always very hard, because those people are the people who started the company. They are the heart and soul of the company. They are part of the reason why people are inspired to go work for a company like that, often making a small salary or much less money than they would make. So it's always a very difficult decision, and one which I'm sure the board didn't take lightly. But in this case, I think the way it was handled was frankly atrocious, right? The guy barely had any heads up. It wasn't communicated to Satya Nadella, who is obviously the Microsoft CEO and a big partner of OpenAI. And a lot of people were taken really by surprise by this. And the short version of the story, of course, is that there was a revolt in the company itself. Employees demanded that he be reinstated. A lot of them threatened to quit. The COO actually quit as a note of protest. And eventually, I think the board had to capitulate and bring him back, which is, you don't see this stuff happen. Generally, when somebody gets pushed out, they're done, they're gone, and there's a replacement and everything else. And I think what made it so unusual, on the one hand, was the speed and the abruptness at which it was done. The way it was handled was really poorly handled. And then I think one of the interesting things was that all of a sudden you saw something you've never really seen before, at least I haven't seen before in Silicon Valley, which is you saw a near mutiny by the employees saying, guys, this is our founder, this is our leader. A bunch of us are going to actually leave. Most of us have signed a letter demanding that you guys bring him back. And now, of course, there's an added demand by the employees saying, we also demand that the board resign. Not a big surprise, right? If you try and kill the king and you fail, generally it's off with your heads. So I'm not very surprised by that. But I was just really shocked, I think, the way most people were at how bad the leadership was. I was like, how can you make a decision like that? How can you fail to communicate it properly to employees? How can you fail to get buy-in from all the right people? How can you fail to communicate it to partners? And then, of course, I think there's another angle to look at, which is the failure of leadership on behalf of those who were involved, right? Clearly, if your co-founder, which in this case is Ilya, who's one of the co-founders, the technical head of OpenAI, goes to the board and says you need to be removed, something obviously led up to that. So that just doesn't happen from one day to the next. Obviously, there's probably been a deep series of schisms between him and Sam that has led up to this. Maybe a lot of things have been tried, but still, it takes pretty bad leadership to do something like this. From the point of view, when I think about leadership, I think about things like empathy, I think about humility, I think about communication, active
Mhm.
listening, all things which good leaders have. And so for me, as a coach, as somebody who works with startup CEOs, who works with CEOs in general, who tries to improve people's leadership ability, I look at this and I'm like, wow, what are we actually learning about this fiasco, about where leadership went wrong?
Yeah.
Why weren't these guys communicating more? Were they really listening to each other? Were they really empathizing with how deeply divided each was on these issues? Because I'm sure that the reasons the board had around AI safety, not wanting to commercialize the product too quickly, not wanting to put a tool which most of us still don't understand, which is incredibly powerful, into the hands of the masses. These are life-changing decisions. This technology is like anything we've seen arguably since electricity. Like,
Mhm.
that's how big the magnitude of this is.
I think what was as fascinating to me, Patrick, from a business perspective, it really shined the light on the governance model of that company. It's a company that has massive influence over the world, and it's continuing to have
Yep.
massive influence in the world. And us as human beings, we step back and say, that was your governance? Those people
Yeah.
were actually running the company? Like
Yeah.
that to me is even the bigger question that has to be asked for companies that are going to have such influence on us as human beings. Like, who are these people behind OpenAI? That's the bigger question to me.
Good question. It's a good question. There was I think the governance issue is the right question to ask, right? It's like when you have a company like Microsoft that's invested $10 billion into the
Yes.
company and they don't have a seat on the board, what's all
Yes.
that about? And they are the ones that are breathing life into OpenAI from a financial perspective. And Satya Nadella heard about it like minutes before the press release went out. So you can't make mistakes like that in any company, much less a company that is having such a transformative effect on the world as OpenAI is.
If maybe we weave some vitamin G into this, maybe we as humans have some gratitude that it happened. Are we not, what happened if we didn't know about this governance situation and something unfolds in 24 or 36 months at the pace that it's moving? Do
Yeah,
you know what I'm getting at, right? So maybe it's good that it did happen now.
it is. I'd like to think that. I think that's a very positive and optimistic message to send out, Keith. And I think the world definitely needs more positivity. If
Yeah.
you look at your X feed or you look at the news, there's a lot of bad news out there. So you're right. That is the way to look at it, because now you're going to have people, you're going to have somebody senior from Microsoft for sure on the board. You're going to have, I think I'm not sure if it's confirmed, but there was talk of Larry Summers, who's obviously a big name from government, now
Mhm.
being on the board as well. I think
Mhm.
when you bring in that level of professionalism, that level of oversight, I think things are going to be done better. And I think people realize that this is a unique company. To
Mhm.
me, it's like Google in 2002, right? It's that
Yes.
level